The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick, your host from Firearm Mentor and Stress to Logic. And today, well, before we get into the show, I would like to wish everybody out there a happy Mother's Day. Whether you are a mother, a son, a husband, a father, a grandfather, I hope that you are spending time with family. And even if you're a mother hyphen, you can fill in the gap there. I wish you a happy Mother's Day as well. So that was just a little bit of humor, but I do genuinely hope everyone is spending time with family. So I have on the line James Rose, who is a Nashville attorney in the Juvenile Justice System. And I got a hold of him through, again, the Speaker Lab, which is this keynote speaking program that I'm involved in. He is also involved in. And James is a very interesting character. I don't mean character, a very interesting person. He works within the Juvenile Justice System. And just before we came online here, we had a little conversation. And he pointed out, rightfully so, that the general public really does not know about the juvenile justice system. Sure, they talk about, oh, that's a juvenile delinquent, or sometimes we call our own kids delinquents just to tease them a little bit. But the juvenile justice system, the set of laws and procedures that go along with it, are different than the adult criminal justice system. And the whole idea is, if possible, to avoid the criminal justice system for these youth to see if they can be rehabilitated. That's for low-level stuff. So, James, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Marcus, thank you, and I echo your sentiments. Happy Mother's Day to everyone.
Sweet. Can you tell everyone, what is your origin story? Why did you want to become an attorney and more specifically focus on juvenile law?
Attorneys are leaders, and I had the dream in high school of becoming an attorney and just being a leader. I really didn't come into a certain area of practice. I got really interested in entertainment law at one point, but juvenile law sort of found me. And the personal story is I was in a life transition in about 2006 and got some communication from a local judge that I know in Ashland City, which is boom there in Nashville. And that's when I started out in juvenile law. And I didn't think it was going to be as full-time as it is, but it sort of found me, and my faith tells me that's what the higher power was directing me toward.
I'm going to go off script here. A question popped in my head. Have you been more busy since the pandemic?
We have. My business comes from court appointments, so it has been busier, but it's just a steady stream of business because it's not private hire. I'm paid through a fund in Tennessee that probably exists in most states called the Indigent Representation Fund. And it just sort of, the appointments never stop. And because of some logistical reasons and pay reasons, we've come short of attorneys since the pandemic. So, yes, it just stays busy all the time, but it's gotten a lot busier here in the last couple of years.
Okay. Now, I was just being curious. So you work in juvenile law. And again, I'm going off script a little bit, how does juvenile law differ from the adult criminal justice system?
In juvenile law, there are a couple of areas. Let me kind of deviate just for a second if I can. I practice in two areas, and one is the what's called in Tennessee, the dependency and neglect system. Most every state has its equivalent. It may not be called dependency and neglect or dependent and neglected child, but in those cases, that's where a parent runs afoul of, in Tennessee, it's the Department of Children's Services or maybe a private party because of poor parenting or drugs, domestic violence, physical abuse, sex abuse, that sort of thing. So that's one area. But to go back to your question, the juvenile justice system, there technically is no juvenile criminal in the state of Tennessee. It's juvenile delinquent. It is more rehabilitative focused. And of course, adults go through a rehabilitative process too. There are mental health courts and drug courts and that sort of thing for the adults. But in juvenile law, we are really, really focused more so on trying to rehabilitate that youth before it is too late, before they turn 18. And continue to get into more trouble when they become adults. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. It's just more therapeutic, for lack of a better term, and working with their families and working through their history and trying to make them better citizens before they turn 18, and of course saving tax dollars too from having to keep them in jail after they turn 18. So
Right.
it's a process that's trying to stop the bleeding before it becomes a wound.
Very good. Can you share a success story or two of cases where a juvenile delinquent was really successfully rehabilitated, went back into society, and became a successful contributor to their community?
There are so many cases, Marcus, that I don't have any specific ones in mind, but I will tell you this. There are a couple. I think that if you have a youth who is involved in what would be considered a minor case, like they get into a fight at school maybe, and they get a delinquent petition filed on them, or maybe they get caught with some illegal drugs or driving without a license or things of that nature. If they can get a good attitude about it, and usually the attitudes turn around, those are the ones who are successful. Another success story that I will share is in general is what's called the youth court program, which is we have here in Nashville. In the youth court program, we go into the schools, and it's a real case where the youth pleads guilty, but his or her peers decide, a jury of his or her peers at a school decide what's going to happen and what the consequences are going to be. And there are attorney advocates who practice, and I've been a judge in the youth court for several years now. So most of those students turn out really well too. Those are just a couple of things. Can't remember every specific situation, but those are a couple of items that are notable.
And you're part of your church emergency response team, or as I call it, the God Squad. What is involved? That was my little joke. And I am too in my house of worship as well. I train them in active shooter responses, and I'm on the security committee. So very similar. I'm just curious how your church handles the security or emergency response incidents.
We had a series of shootings at churches about 5 years ago, maybe longer now, and had to become extremely aware of that. And it started along those lines. It's called Church Emergency Response Team. I go to Woodbine Hills Church, and we have a police officer on duty in the lobby at every Sunday worship session, and there are also leaders within the church. We wear lanyards. We're trained in CPR and defibrillator training, AED training, to help with those situations. So it's general security. We're not just watching out for gunmen who come from outside and want to create havoc and injury and death, but we're also helping in situations, just keeping kids in the right place and making sure people know where to go. And it's become more comprehensive, not just a watchdog effort, but it's become more comprehensive and ready to assist if somebody becomes injured or if somebody were to need CPR during the worship service. So we serve a lot of different roles, but we're there every Sunday for both of our worship sessions, and we are assisted by the Metropolitan Nashville Police.
That's awesome. A lot of people don't realize that when you work in a security role, really the most common incident is a medical incident. So it warms my heart that you know CPR and AED, and we have that too at my house of worship. And we don't call our security team, we don't call it CERT, and I'm Jewish. We call them Hey Sedanders. Do you know what a Hey Sedander is?
I don't. I'd like to know that.
Well, that's when a congregant gets up to leave. Somebody says, "Hey, sit down there." Okay, it was a joke and not a good one. I'm kidding. I just made it up. As the listeners know, I'm a firearms instructor, and I'm an advocate for lawful firearm ownership. And like the rest of my contemporaries, we're always concerned about firearms that are in the hands of those who shouldn't have them, especially unsupervised youth. Can you touch on illegal gun possession among juvenile delinquents?
Absolutely. Guns people probably, when they think of guns and youth, they think of school shooters. Sadly, in this day, in this world that we live in, with some very deranged people. But in Nashville, at least, and I would suspect other cities too, the youth, the guns being possessed by youths, minors, is a serious problem, and it really begins with a deadly cocktail. Not the kind of cocktail that you want to order when you turn 21, but it's a cocktail of illegal drugs, guns, and car theft. And a lot of the situations that we see involve those three things. It's illegal in Tennessee, and I would suspect many other states too, for any person under the age of 18 to possess a gun with certain obvious exceptions like hunting, sanctioned target practice, and that sort of thing. So it really begins with they're using, the vast majority of them would be using marijuana, or which is illegal in Tennessee. But I would imagine in most states where it is legal, it's probably illegal for underage individuals to use marijuana. But in any event, sometimes it's even harder drugs. But they'll be using, and they just make bad decisions. They're out after hours. They lie to their parents, and they go out, and somebody finds a gun, and there's a car theft involved in almost all the situations. So that's a huge problem that we're seeing. And we're working, I'm on the defense side, obviously, but in most of the cases, I'm just going to be honest with you, kids do not make for very smart criminals. So most of our cases don't go to the trial stage. It's going to be a guilty plea and rehabilitative work with the Department of Children's Services, Juvenile Justice side, and the court and the probation officers. So that's the remedy. And like I say, most of our delinquent cases do not go to trial because the evidence is so overwhelming. So we're more focused on, because of that, you watch for that. If there's a situation where there's evidence that could have the petition dismissed, but in most cases, we're focused on that rehabilitative part that I mentioned earlier.
What's involved in rehabilitation?
A lot of times we have what's called a child and family team meeting, which is CFTM in our vernacular. And what that is a facilitator from the Department of Children's Services goes to the detention center. Many times the youth is detained. And so his or her parent has the opportunity to come, or maybe we'll call them into the meeting if they can't be there in person. We just develop a plan of action for that youth. A lot of times, one other thing, Marcus, is the mental health piece. We need to seek out mental health treatment, make sure they're on any prescribed medications. And so that's a big part. It's a big part of what we're doing. It always becomes that. The better peer selection, because usually they're picking out friends that aren't the best for them. That's often a step. But in any event, we'll generate a series of steps and a series of notes through the child and family team meeting process. And it often includes better peer selection, maybe a mentor for the youth, activities, getting into activities such as sports and other things that are better, much better investments of time than going out and getting in trouble and committing illegal acts. So that's one part of it. The other part is the probation. In our probation system, the youth, I'm not intimately familiar with it because I don't go through it, but I do know that their court reviews, probation officer will institute certain rules, but will also help with things like weapon safety courses. If you're caught with a gun, you usually lose your driving privileges in Tennessee for a year, and you have to take a weapon safety course. That's one example. But the probation officer will help with any services that are needing counseling. A lot of our youths come, and not to be disrespectful to anyone, but they come from single parent homes, and that's often a tough situation. Maybe they feel abandoned from the parent who's not there, and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of things that go into it, but each youth situation is different. And so that's why you have to sit down. You can't just have a cookie cutter approach and say, this is what we're going to do. You have to sit down and learn more. There are certainly rehabilitative steps that apply in almost every situation, but you have to be specific to the situation that youth is in.
Very good. How do these juveniles gain access to firearms?
That's a good one. I often wonder that myself. A lot of times they're stolen. Parents will come in, they'll be bewildered because they're like, I don't own a gun. I don't even have a gun in my house. I do not know. That is one, and they're not generally going to tell us. But if the police are involved, the police can run the serial number on the gun and immediately determine whether it's stolen or not. And many times there'll be a vehicle and they'll have a gun. There was one situation I know of recently where the gun was one was in the glove box and one was on underneath the passenger seat. Well, every youth, due to a law called constructive possession, every youth in that car was deemed to be constructively in possession of those two guns. But I don't have a direct answer to your question other than many times the guns are stolen. So maybe they were in there to begin with and the car is stolen and the guns are stolen, but I don't know. But they're somehow, when they're not in their right minds and they're under the influence of mind-altering substances, i.e. drugs, I guess they'll do anything. So they don't come from a legal source, but I don't know exactly where they're getting them.
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that in Nashville, not every household has a firearm?
That's surprising. At least parents claim that. I know where you're going with that. We're a big Second Amendment type state. The law about minors is constitutional, by the way. I've studied Second Amendment law somewhat, not to a great extent. I have looked at the U.S. Supreme Court case law on Second Amendment, but you're right. I mean, I really don't know, though, Marcus. That's a good question, but they're stealing them in most cases. That's for sure. But at least the parents are telling us we don't keep guns, or we don't have guns, or maybe they can't afford to buy a gun. Who knows? But
right.
It's illegal. That's for sure.
Where I was going for was comedy relief. That was my only goal for there. But I appreciate the explanation.
Just because I don't laugh doesn't mean I didn't think it was funny.
You're laughing on the inside, as everyone tells me. So we were talking about the juvenile justice system. I want to move into the parenting or neglect section. Can you explain to our listeners what a guardian ad litem is?
Yes, the dependency and neglect system is not a criminal system. The consequences of a dependent neglected child case would be for restrictions on your contact with your child if you do not either successfully defend the petition or take corrective action. A guardian ad litem is the attorney. In some states, it's my understanding it doesn't have to be an attorney, but I think in most states it does. In Tennessee, it does have to be an attorney. And the guardian ad litem is simply representing the best interests of the child. The child is the client. However, you are representing not necessarily what the child wants, but you're representing the best interests of that child in many realms of the case. If the case is found to be true, it's what's called adjudicated. And if most of the cases are adjudicated, either after a trial or through a stipulated settlement, most of our cases involve domestic violence and or a combination of drugs, and mental health is always in the mix. I have seen a few more sex abuse cases, sadly, this year, but that's generally the exception, not the rule. And physical abuse cases, probably seen a few more of those this year as well, sadly, but the majority of the cases are drugs and domestic violence. But regardless of the type of the case, the guardian ad litem is there to advocate for the interests of the child. Now, that may not just be in court, but there are child and family team meetings. There are permanency plan hearings for children who may be in the custody of the state. The permanency plan is the legal roadmap to create a permanency for that child. Not a permanency, but permanency. And it would include responsibilities for the parent. If the youth is old enough, it would include responsibilities for the youth. But the guardian ad litem would advocate for the permanency plan. If the youth is in a bad placement, the guardian ad litem might advocate for that placement to change, or just just in general, the medical needs of the youth. The list goes on and on. But the guardian ad litem is there and needs to know the child. I visit the children I represent as guardian ad litem, and normally do that on Saturdays. Got one tomorrow that I'm going to go visit. But our clients realm go from age newborn to 17.9, because a lot of our cases are drug exposed infants, and that is mothers who are using illegal drugs during pregnancy, sadly. And that can have many children make it out of it without much damage, permanent damage, but in some cases it can result in very heavy consequences to a child's life. So that's a little bit about what we do as guardians ad litem, but the parents also have attorneys to represent them if they're indigent. And most of our parents are indigent that we see in the dependency and neglect system.
So with that said, is this court appointed?
It is. The guardians ad litem are compensated out of the Indigent Representation Fund. If the parents are indigent, if the parent is not indigent, he or she would have to represent his or herself or hire their own attorney. Most of the parents are indigent, and we're also compensated at an hourly rate out of the Indigent Representation Fund here in Tennessee.
I want to segue to schools. On your website, and we'll get to what your website is in a little bit,
Sure.
But you talk about how you can help educators reduce juvenile crime. Can you expand on that and what you actually teach the people at a high level?
I think in a nutshell, it comes down to 3 M words: motivation, mental health, and many good people. And teachers can make a difference each and every day simply by taking more of an interest in their students. It's practical ways to help and to notice things that notice warning signs, red flags that may enable them or empower them to make a difference in their schools. And when I talk about school safety, we're not just talking about a safer school that's safe from gun violence and that sort of thing. It's a place where people feel a sense of belonging, they feel comfortable, and they feel like they can share their troubles if they need to in an appropriate setting. If there are problems at home, for instance, they can talk about that, and they can talk to teachers about that. But I think the biggest aspect of it, Marcus, is that if a teacher will take interest and will notice the warning signs and will befriend their students in an appropriate fashion and in a professional fashion, you can really make a difference and reduce juvenile crime. Now, I use juvenile crime. Technically, there is no juvenile crime, but reduce juvenile delinquency just by acts you take in your schools. And again, my presentation is not about going out and taking a bunch of time to change the world, because teachers are very busy. They have a lot of responsibilities. So part of my talk is how to do it every day in a practical sense, and to ensure that children have strong mental health and seek out the help that they need. So to ensure that children are motivated by hopefully something other than video games, but they're motivated and they find their passion in life, and that they have the right people, many good people, and the many good people certainly includes teachers. So there are small practical steps that I teach teachers and educators to take that they can put into action every day that they're with students.
Very good. You don't know this, but my wife is a teacher, so I very much appreciate and she's in an impoverished area as well, with, I would say, probably clientele that would come to you because a lot of them are on the lower end of the income scale.
I'll interject just quickly. I've
Sure.
come from a family of educators. I'm not obviously a teacher myself, but my late father was a doctoral level educator and administrator, and my mother was a kindergarten teacher for a long time, and for the last 10 or 15 years of her career was a middle school guidance counselor. So
I would disagree with you. You are an educator. You're educating my listeners. You speak. You got into law because leadership and education go hand in hand. So you might not be a certified school teacher, but you definitely fit my definition of an educator. So that's just a mindset that I have. I read something about one judge in your county, and it seemed like there was only one judge in your county. Is there just one juvenile judge, or is there one judge for the entire county?
This would surprise people, but Nashville is probably like the 20th largest city in the country. And we only have one juvenile judge for our entire county. We have a metropolitan government here, so Davidson County is Nashville. And it's Metropolitan Nashville, Davidson County, and we only have one elected judge. Sheila Calloway is our judge, and she's a big community leader as well as being a very knowledgeable person in the law. But she is assisted by 9 different magistrates who hear cases and subject to review by the judge. So there are magistrates who hear various types of cases. I practice most frequently in front of about 4 of those magistrates. But we have that's our system. Every county can have magistrates. The big cities of Nashville and Memphis, we don't have a ton of big cities in Tennessee. I guess if you're in Chicago, you would not think Nashville is a very big city, but it is in Tennessee. So we have Nashville, Memphis, and Knoxville, are our biggest cities. They would have more magistrates, but that is our system. We can have one judge who's elected subject to election every 8 years, and then we have the magistrates. But the magistrates are appointed by the judge, and they are very good, and I enjoy practicing in front of all of them.
When we return, we'll be continuing the conversation with James Rose, public speaker and juvenile attorney. Thank you. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.